Well, the issue of bail comes up in the Court of Appeal as the court continues its hearing into whether dancehall entertainer Vybz Kartel and his co-accused should get a retrial. How did it come up? Stay tuned. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, everybody, especially if you're new to the channel. Let me just remind you, please just take a moment and subscribe, because my stats are showing that 75% of all of you who are watching the videos aren't yet subscribed, and I know you've just forgotten, all right? So subscribe. Okay, let's get into it now. The recap of day 5 in the Court of Appeal hearing as to whether Vybz Kartel and his co-accused should get a retrial. So what happened today? Again, it was an interesting day. I thought the prosecutors made some really interesting points. And let's start with this issue of how bail came up. Now, lawyers for the accused persons, as I mentioned in my previous videos, they have been making some very strong arguments that a retrial would end up by causing violations to the constitutional rights of Kartel and his co-accused. One of those rights that there's a lot of focus on is the issue of delay. Would the men be able to get a fair trial within a reasonable time? Remember, they've been in custody now since 2011. If there's going to be a retrial, we're talking about another couple of years more than likely. Will their constitutional right to a fair trial in a reasonable time be breached? Now, today, the prosecutor who was addressing the court on that matter said, look, we accept that if the matter goes for a retrial, it's likely that their right to a hearing within a reasonable time is going to be breached. So her position was to start out by saying, we're not trying to argue that. She did say, however, her very strong argument then was that, look, we, however, believe that if there's going to be a breach of a constitutional right like this, the right to a fair trial within a reasonable time, what you then have to do, the next step has to be, what is the remedy to deal with that breach? Because she said the idea of throwing out a case, of dismissing a case because of delay has to be a last resort, because it's in the public interest that this retrial takes place. So therefore, you want to look at possible remedies. How could you respond to this issue of the delay in the case? And two of the remedies that she suggested, one were the idea of an expedited hearing, meaning put the retrial on the court list as a matter of priority, so it happens quickly, rather than having the men then again having to wait years for the second trial. And the second possible remedy, she mentioned, was that of bail. I should say that this whole idea of a priority hearing had actually been mentioned at the beginning of the hearing, when the presiding judge said she had got from the court, the Supreme Court rather, the list that the Court of Appeal had asked for. The Court of Appeal had asked the Supreme Court to send a list of all the cases that the Court of Appeal had sent back for retrial in the past 6 years and the status of those cases. This is because the Court of Appeal wanted information to try and gauge what would likely happen in this Kartel case if it's sent back for retrial. So the Supreme Court sent that information today. We heard it today. So there are 2 cases that have been sent for retrial in the past 6 years. One of them was a case called Trevor Taft. Now, Taft had been convicted of a 2012 murder. His matter had been sent back to the Supreme Court in September 2022. You had another case, the second case was Rashawn Hamilton. He had been convicted of a 2008 murder, and his matter had been sent back to the Supreme Court in September 2023. In neither of these cases has a retrial taken place. A retrial date, in fact, has not even been set. The court also said that for judge alone trials, that's where you don't have a jury, the dates are now being set for late 2025. For jury trials, the dates now are being set for late 2026. But the Supreme Court said, hold on, we also do have a system where we can give a case priority attention, meaning it would be fast-tracked if the circumstances required. So that does suggest that there is this possibility that if the cartel case is sent for retrial, it could be put on a priority list and therefore, heard at a relatively early date. All right, let me come back to the issue of bail now. So remember, what I've said so far is that the prosecutor has said that one possible way of dealing with a possible breach of a constitutional right to a trial within a reasonable time is the grant of bail. Grant of bail also came up as a possible remedy in relation to this idea of the ordeal the men have suffered. Remember, we spoke about the reports, the medical reports that have been submitted on behalf of Vybz Kartel, how he's suffering physically, his physical health has declined, his emotional health has declined, his mental health, and the other men also have filed affidavits speaking to the way in which they're being affected. And again, the prosecutor said one possible remedy to deal with this is bail. So bail is there now on the table. The court is being said, prosecutors are saying to the court is, look, this matter should only be thrown out as an absolute last resort, but you don't need to go there because here are some options that are available to you. Okay, so there's another point that the prosecution made that I thought was such an important and interesting point, and it had to do with the publicity issue. So remember, the lawyers for the accused men have been arguing that there's just so much publicity in this case, so many YouTubers talking, so many bloggers, so many vloggers, people have been talking about this case so extensively that they're saying there's no way we'd be able to find a jury who could sit in a retrial and do their work independently and impartially and unbiased. The prosecutors now today said, hold on. They said, if we follow that line of reasoning, we would never be able to prosecute any well-known person. And I just thought that was a really interesting point, because think about it. Say, for instance, you have this, let's say an athlete, big-time athlete, who does something illegal, who needs to be charged, but the whole internet blows up and there is, talk about it, and every media house and every social media site is talking about this for weeks and weeks on end. The argument, therefore, would be, hold on, there's so much publicity, the person can't get a fair trial. And that's what the prosecutor was saying today. He was saying if we go down that road, it's going to mean that there are certain people we would never be able to try for a criminal offense. And therefore, they're saying the court cannot accept that particular line of argument, because it would then put the society in a position where the public interest would be compromised in relation to, say, celebrity cases and that kind of. Okay, so there is one aspect of the hearing today, though, where I didn't think the prosecution was as strong as it could have been. And this was in relation to their submissions, what arguing on the point of the ordeal the men were, had been suffering, as well as the conditions and their state, meaning the state of the men. And they were relying on an affidavit from a prison official, a superintendent of the prisons, and they remember, again, the lawyers for the accused had filed a whole heap of affidavits and medical reports, in particular the medical reports speaking to the physical and mental condition of the men, right? Kartel in particular. And what the judge said was, why are you countering essentially a report from a doctor with that of a prison official? And she said, there's a prison doctor. Basically, why don't we have an affidavit from the prison doctor? Surely that would make more sense if you have a doctor saying, the men are in, or the men aren't in great condition, or this is a problem. You want to hear a counter argument from a person who has the same kind of qualifications, So she was saying, really and truly, why not a doctor? Why this prison official, and how much importance are we supposed to attach to that? So that was one of the other things that came up today. But case continues on Tuesday. At that time, the prosecution is going to wrap up, and then the lawyers for the accused men then also get a chance to respond. And then, I don't know, maybe, just maybe, the court will give some kind of indication in terms of when they might be likely to rule. What I would say is that given the emphasis throughout this hearing on the issue of delay, I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Court of Appeal is not going to be dragging its feet on issuing this particular judgment. But of course, I'll keep you updated on all of that. And in addition, I think there are lots of other interesting things about this case throughout the years, and I'm going to be sharing some of those in some videos. So make sure you look out for those as well. All right.